Good evening. The Supreme Court is now the stage for a pivotal legal battle over tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. At stake is not just the fate of these tariffs, but the very limits of presidential power over trade. The justices are weighing whether a president can unilaterally reshape U.S. trade policy, a question with far-reaching consequences. The Constitution gives Congress the authority to regulate trade and impose taxes, but the administration claims emergency powers under a specific law. Businesses hit by billions in tariffs argue the president overstepped, forcing the court to define the boundary between executive and legislative power. During oral arguments, justices from both sides pressed for clarity on the law's intent and the risks of unchecked presidential authority. The case transcends politics, striking at the heart of the separation of powers. Companies have restructured operations around these tariffs. A ruling could trigger massive refunds or embolden future presidents. The outcome will shape American trade, law, and the balance of power for years. The world is watching as the Supreme Court prepares to deliver a decision that could redefine the roles of Congress and the president in economic policy. The stakes are high, and the decision is expected soon. This is a defining moment for the structure of American democracy. The court's ruling will echo through every corner of the economy. Central to this case is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, passed in 1977. IEEPA lets the president regulate international economic transactions after declaring a national emergency. The Trump administration used IEEPA to justify broad tariffs, arguing it was necessary for national security. Challengers counter that IEEPA was never meant to overhaul the entire tariff system, just to target specific threats. They point out that no previous president has used IEEPA for such sweeping tariffs. The justices are focused on whether IEEPA's broad language truly gives the president the power to tax, a power the Constitution reserves for Congress. The court's interpretation of IEEPA could shift the balance of power between the branches for decades. The government's legal team argued that IEEPA gives the president vital flexibility to respond to emergencies. They claim tariffs were a necessary response to threats like unfair trade and drug trafficking. The administration insists Congress intended to grant broad discretion for national security, but justices pressed hard. If tariffs are allowed, what limits remain? Could a president ban all trade? The court is wary of opening the door to unchecked executive power. The government frames the tariffs as a temporary, necessary measure, not a permanent shift in trade policy. The justices must decide how much leeway the president should have in times of crisis. Lawyer Neil Katyal, representing the challengers, argued that only Congress can impose taxes and regulate trade. He called the administration's use of IEEPA unprecedented and a threat to the constitutional balance. Katyal warned that letting presidents set tariffs by emergency decree would erode democracy and bypass Congress. Justices questioned whether IEEPA's language could be read more broadly and raised concerns about unwinding billions in collected tariffs. Katyal urged the court to reaffirm that major economic decisions require open debate and congressional approval. The challengers want the court to restore the proper balance of power. Justices from both sides of the ideological spectrum expressed deep skepticism about granting the president sweeping tariff powers. They worried that such a ruling would upset the balance between Congress and the executive. Both liberal and conservative justices questioned whether IEEPA was ever meant to give the president a blank check. The court is searching for a clear limit to prevent future overreach. This bipartisan concern may be the most decisive factor in the case. Chief Justice Roberts raised the major questions doctrine, which requires Congress to clearly authorize executive action on issues of vast significance. The challengers argue IEEPA lacks the explicit language needed for such a sweeping tariff program. The court could rule that while IEEPA is valid, it doesn't authorize this level of action, without striking down the law itself. This would check executive power and send a message. Congress must be explicit when delegating major authority. The doctrine would reinforce the separation of powers and put responsibility back on Congress. The court could avoid a broad ruling on emergency powers, focusing instead on the scale of the tariffs. Many justices seemed interested in this targeted approach. The Supreme Court's decision will have lasting consequences for the balance of power in Washington. If the president's authority is upheld, future administrations could use tariffs as a primary tool of foreign policy, creating uncertainty for businesses. If the court rules against the administration, it will reaffirm congressional control over trade and taxation, but could trigger logistical chaos over billions in collected tariffs. The ruling will set a precedent for how far presidential emergency powers can go. It will signal to Congress, the White House, and the world how the U.S. divides economic authority. This case is about more than tariffs. It's a test of the nation's commitment to checks and balances. The decision will shape American democracy and global trade for years to come. The world awaits the court's answer.